Welcome everyone, good afternoon, wherever you are, wherever you're joining from, and welcome to today's Change Chat, which today is on the subject of your Psychology Toolkit for leading change. So I know a lot of you, I'm sure, on the call, but I'm Fraser. For those who don't know me, Fraser Collins, I look after business development and partnerships at Trueman Change, so I hope you find today's session very much useful. For those who don't know us in general, maybe your first time on the Change Chat, Trueman Change, we are a specialist change management consultancy. So we spend a massive amount of time working inside and with local authorities, working closely with leadership teams and managers and staff, and basically supporting their people as they go through whatever change they're going through. So great to have, as I say, so many on the call today. It's a topical subject, as I mentioned. Change has indeed become a constant, I think, for so many organisations. And while we often spend a lot of time focusing on perhaps the process and the delivery side, it's really understanding the psychology of people that often makes the biggest difference to whether that change lands, is embraced or resisted indeed. So today, leaning on the expertise we like to think we have, and Lucy's expertise more specifically, we thought it'd be helpful to share some psychological tools to help you and your colleagues and teams as you navigate whatever change it is you're going through. So quick bit of housekeeping. We, as always, keep these sessions fairly informal. Lucy will run this session as more of a kind of presentation today, but please, if you've got any questions, drop them into the chat. Lucy will have some time to answer them at some point later on. We do record the sessions as always, so everybody who's booked on today will receive a copy of the recording. So if you need to drop off or you want to share with anybody, please do so. It's also on our usual channels, YouTube and our social media channels. So without further ado, pass over to Lucy, founder of Trueman Change, Organisational Psychologist, who, as I say, will be running the session. Lucy, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So can everybody see my slides okay? Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do my best to be professional today, but I am very giddy because I foster animals, those of you that know me, and I've had a pony come to me this morning. I've never had anything to do with horses before, and I've got a camera going off on my phone saying there's movement in the field every 5 minutes, but I will try and stay focused. But those of you that know me will know me. I'm frequently fostering new animals, so I'm very easily excited. So thank you very much for joining us today. So as Fraser said, we do a range of these and on different topics, but we decided to do one that was quite specific around psychology tools that we think would be helpful for people as they are going through some sort of change and transformation in the workplace. I can see there's lots of friendly faces who we already know, but there's some people who we don't know. I would really love to hear, if you don't mind just putting in the chat what sector you work from, because I know we've got lots of local government people, but we had people from other sectors register as well. So please do just pop in the chat what sector you work in, just because it's useful for me to know. I default to talking quite a lot about local government, and I can see lots of you are local government, but the tools that we are sharing today are not specific to any sector. It's just that I tend to work a lot in local government, and we do work in housing as well. So thank you very much for that. It's useful to see where people are coming from. So what I want to talk to you about today is basically this kind of history that we have, where when it comes to change and transformation, we have a real tendency to focus very much on a process. And I think that some of that is because a lot of the tools and techniques around change and transformation come from the world of project management. And project management is a good set of tools for managing resources, for planning, and for knowing what order you are doing things in. But actually, it's not necessarily the best tool for understanding people and their behaviours. And I think that when we're going through change, we have this tendency to focus on very much it's a process, it's predictable, we're going to do everything in the right order. And sometimes we go through and invest a lot of money in change and transformation, and it doesn't quite land with people, and we're not sure why, because we followed the process correctly and we've done all the plans. So today is really a chance to explore what if we looked a little bit wider than traditional project management and change management and started to think about organisational psychology as a field that's available to us. There's lots of research, there's lots of evidence, so there's a lot of knowledge and understanding available to us that I think we're sometimes guilty of not kind of tapping into. So let me just go on to the next slide. So stick your hand up if you've seen this before. So you can we raise hands in Zoom? I'm used to Teams, but yes, I can see some people literally raising their hands. So most people have seen the change curve before, and it is a tool that is very often rolled out whenever there's any sort of change and transformation going. But I don't know if people know the history of this tool. So I'm always interested in the history of where kind of tools and models came from. And for example, the history of where project and program management came from was very much about engineering. It was never about people change. Well, the change curve came from a study which was done around what people's responses are to receiving a terminal diagnosis. And it has also been adopted by research around grief. So if any of you have ever come across, the stages of grief, it's very aligned to this. And so I think, first of all, it's interesting to just question that, and whether the process that we go through when being faced with something as difficult as a terminal illness is the same as the process we go through when we're changing something in work. That doesn't feel like it is the same to me. And I think the first thing I would say about this is that, again, similar to the world of project and program management, it's viewing change as a journey of multiple stages that we will go through, and assuming that that is predictable and that it happens in the same order for the same people, for different people. In my experience, it looks a lot more like this. It doesn't look like that we all go through things in the same order. It's certainly not a case that, one day we decide we're transitioning, we're going to, from the next day, wake up and decide that we're going from anger and blame to bargaining and self-blame. It's this kind of, there isn't this predictability to it. But I do think it is useful, particularly for more junior managers who are not very experienced and who might have been trained very much in the ways of managing business as usual and not had any training around how we do change and transformation. Because what it does tell us is that there are emotional responses to change. Now, that is not consistent with people, and we know from all sorts of research that there are certain things about change that impact us emotionally more than others. So, for example, if something is requiring us to change our identity, then our emotional response will be higher. If something is impacting our relationships with people that we trust, then that impact is higher. If something's just a change of process, for most people, it's just always a bit of a pain. I'm going to have to learn how to do a new process, but it's not that deep. So there's lots of things that affect this. But I think that when you're looking about a particularly large scale top-down change, and I will use local government as an example because that's what I know. There's lots of councils at the moment, literally this week, got their decisions about local government reorganisation. That is a very political top-down agenda that people feel a bit of a lack of autonomy around. Because we know that engagement helps us to get through those emotions quicker, the more you engage with a change, the better. Now, where that really plays out in organisations where it's a big top-down agenda is it means that your senior people will be more engaged with the change at an earlier stage. So what you often see is there's a big transformation happening and people are going through this range of emotions. But by the time that the senior people like your chief execs and your directors, they're coming out of it, they've engaged with it, they've had some autonomy, they've shaped it. Actually, at that point, the staff are still very much in that kind of pit of, we don't know what's going on here, and that sort of chaos. And what you end up then is with leaders that don't really have a lot of patience, because they've had more time to engage with something and get used to it and shape it, and then the people that they're leading have not had that opportunity. So therefore it's you get this kind of mismatch, and people, once we've gotten over something ourselves, we don't have a great deal of patience for other people that haven't gotten over it. So there is some use to the change curve, and I think it's certainly useful for understanding that emotional impact, but I think we need to take it with a pinch of salt that it's people will go through it all at the same time and in the right way. So my question to you today is, do these approaches work? So if we continue to approach change from this kind of, we do this, then we do this, and it's a step and a step and a step and a step, and then everything will be fine, does that work for us? And I would argue as a psychologist that it's not actually how our brains work. And I think we need to start shifting away from this. There's a very predictable journey here, and more towards, we have a set of needs in the workplace. And that, you know, we need a sense of autonomy. We need to feel like we're good at our job. We need to have good relationships. When those needs are negatively impacted by change, we don't do well as we go through the change. And just saying, okay, well, by this point we'll have done this, and by this point we'll have done this, doesn't necessarily give us that kind of safety to go through it. So really, that's what today's session is about. And I'm going to share with you some alternative models that are not about a sequence and about a journey, and are more about thinking about what are people's needs, how do our brains work when we are in the workplace. So why psychology? Obviously, I'm biased, but I'm curious, and I would love people to put in the chat, or you can unmute, who uses this phrase, who's heard this phrase, we need to win over hearts and minds when we're talking about change. So is that a phrase that is familiar to you? And if it is, what do you think it means? It's not a trick question. There's not a specific meaning to this, but I'm always interested in people's interpretation. So please do drop in the chat. Is it a phrase you've heard? What do you think it means in your organisation when we say this? Or if you're happy to unmute, then please do. So we've got Scott saying, tell people how it will affect them emotionally and personally, not just the process. Oh, we've got someone that's not heard of it. Alignment. So yes, it's familiar. I think it means to get buy-in from those affected. And again, someone else hasn't heard it, so it might be a local government phrase. We make sure people have the knowledge about the change, but also the emotional engagement. We have to get them to feel something about the change before you can engage with them. So we've got lots of different interpretations, but all kind of with a lot in common. So my pitch to you is that I think we can answer this question through the world of organisational psychology. So on this slide are some of the things that we study in organisational psychology, which is basically psychology of organisation, psychology in the workplace, if you will. So we look to understand people's emotions, how they are resilient, how what psychological safety means, how people work together as teams. So that's a lot around that kind of emotional side. But we also study and understand things like judgment and bias and how we make decisions and how we make sense of things. So I think there is this entire body of research available to us that I think can help us to really clearly identify what we mean by hearts and minds. And yet we often neglect that area of research, and we focus very much on this process-driven approach and this project and program management. So that's what today's about, really. So where are the little snippets of research from this world of organizational psychology that we can pull in to help us understand how people get through change? So what we know from the world of psychology is, first of all, we need a sense of autonomy. And a lot of psychology is fancy words for things that are really obvious. And when you hear it, you're like, well, obviously, you know, we don't tend to do well when we are being micromanaged. Now, there is a spectrum here, and some people really thrive with a lot of autonomy. Some people thrive with more structure. But generally speaking, if we don't have any say in anything about how we work, then we're not going to be as well engaged and we're not going to be as motivated. Very often, this is something that is a need that's negatively impacted when we do a kind of traditional organizational change program. So the second thing we know is that relationships matter hugely. So I imagine, and I won't ask you to put your hands up in a public forum where you don't all know each other, but I imagine most of us at some point in our career have been in a situation where the organization was good, the work was good, but we just didn't have good relationships with the people that we worked in. Maybe it was one manager that we didn't get on with, or it was one colleague. And equally, we might have had the opposite of that, where we've worked in an organization where the work was pretty boring and we didn't completely love it, but because we had such great colleagues, we stayed because we had a good time there. So it's something that's really important in terms of our immediate and close relationships in work really, really matter to us. And again, when we're doing things like restructures and reorganizations, we're messing with that. So people might be losing a sense of connection or worried about who they're going to be working with going forward. We also know that culture is absolutely crucial, and it's something that is often viewed as a kind of, magic fairy dust thing in the air that is we're not able to influence it. That is not the case at all. So there are some really good models, and we are not covering culture particularly today, but I do other change chats on culture. There's some really good models that can help us understand what actually is culture and how do you influence it. And it is basically this kind of shared set of beliefs and assumptions that you have in an organization. Again, I imagine most of you, if you work in change and transformation, will have had an experience where there's been a change launched or a change program delivered, but it's just not landed with the staff because the change that we're trying to make happen is not aligned with the culture that we have. So those two always need to go hand in hand. We can learn new things. So we have this amazing thing with our brain called neuroplasticity, where we can learn new things all the time. However, our brains, I'm not going to use the word lazy, but our brains are very efficient. So we don't actually want to learn new things a lot of the time. So we like being on autopilot. Our brain likes we know what we're doing. We're on autopilot. We've done this 100 times before. However, when we nudge it out of that comfort zone, we can learn new things. And that's, again, an area of change and transformation that sometimes we throw a bit of training at something, but if there's this resistance, then we kind of, we lean back away from it because there is that resistance there. But we can learn new ways of working. And we also know that different people are motivated by different things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. And when we are motivated by different things, that means that we sometimes don't understand other people's behaviors because we assume everybody is motivated by the same things as us. So some people are motivated very much by risk. Some people are motivated very much by reward. And we're going to talk about that a little bit short in a couple of minutes. But that is a really good example of how when we're going through change and we see behaviors changing, we sometimes don't understand what that is. Psychology can help us to understand some of these things. So we're going to talk about 3 models today. So the first one is very much in that space of we're motivated by different things. So the technical term for this particular model is Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory, but we very much refer to it as cats and cheese. And we refer to it as cats and cheese because the original studies around this particular model were done on rats and mice. And they wanted to answer the question, it was originally a motivational piece of research. What are mice motivated by? Are they more motivated by the scent of cat, which is threat, or by the scent of cheese, which is reward? So that's what they set out to understand. And it turned out that the answer to this question was, it depends on the mouse. So mice have individual differences in that some are really motivated by the smell of cats, some are really motivated by the smell of cheese, some are really motivated by both, so they're very chaotic, and some are motivated not particularly by either. They're very good at just staying the course. And this translates to humans. So there are profiling tools that you can use so that you can find out where you are on this spectrum. And what's interesting about this is that they learned that it's not personality. So personality, and there's loads of profiling tools out there like Lumina and MBTI that are based on this concept of that we have a fairly stable personality, and they're measuring things like our openness, conscientiousness, how neurotic we are, and various things that are quite kind of consistent across the board. This doesn't relate to your personality, it relates to your mindset, and your mindset is contextual and can change from different situations. So I often think people think that they don't have control over their mindset, but in fact, you can choose your mindset. So if you are in a situation where you are, having to work out a difficult problem, it is quite a healthy thing to do to switch your mindset into different places. So if I was really concerned about risk here, what would I be thinking about? If I was really concerned about opportunity here, what would I be thinking about? And if I wasn't particularly bothered by either of them and I was just staying the course, what would I be thinking about? So you can choose your mindset. And I think this is a particularly fascinating tool when going through change and transformation, because what it tells us is when there's something to be won or lost, so when the stakes have increased, different people in your teams are going to respond to it in different ways. So some are going to see the cats and they're going to be thinking, well, what if this goes wrong? They will need to work through those risks. And some people are going to respond to that change by seeing opportunity. And you see this play out on an individual level. You sometimes see it play out on a team level. So in some organizations, you may have teams of people, like perhaps in local authorities, you regen people that are out there looking for cheese, they're trying to regenerate an area. But then you might have some of your corporate functions that are more cat focused because, ultimately the role of procurement, for example, is to make sure that we don't break procurement laws. So that is a role that is all about mitigating the cats. And this can create conflict between teams, because if you've got people that are very focused on, we want to get this done, and they're very gung-ho, and then you've got other people saying, we need to just think this through, there are some risks here, those two groups of people clash. And we have a tendency, when we're not aware of this model, to think if we're talking to somebody and they're talking about cats, what we need to do is flood them with cheese. So we need to tell them, but what about this exciting thing? And what about this exciting thing? That person that's thinking about cats isn't interested in the cheese. So what they need to do is work through methodically, these are the risks here. The way to get these two groups engaging is not by pushing your own view, but actually by giving them the space to work through their view. So it's a fun tool, and it's one of them things that once you're aware of it, you'll see it in your personal life. You'll see it in, you will know people right now as I'm describing this that focus very much on the risk. And then you'll also know people that focus very much on the opportunity. So enabling those two groups of people to talk to each other, and also being mindful of your own style and your own language, and making sure that you are talking in terms of both cats and cheese when you're going through change, is really powerful. So I think this is a tool that's interesting for leaders that are going through change, because you can spot that behavior and you can change how you communicate with people, and you learn to see resistance as, no, we just need to work through some of these risks in order for that person to feel safe to move forward. On a team basis, in an ideal world, you want a mix of these. You don't want all cheese people and you don't want all cats people. You want a mix, and you want to be able to have that healthy tension between them, which is another reason why this tool can be quite fun, because it's introducing a language. So we can talk about cats and cheese instead of saying you are risk averse or you are reckless. We can have a kind of more gentle and less direct conversation. So cats and cheese is a great one for people that are going through change. So the second thing I want to talk about is uncertainty. So because I specialise in change and transformation, I am often dealing with people that are struggling with dealing with uncertainty. And I think that sometimes what we do when we're struggling to deal with uncertainty is we really hang our hat on, well, by this point we will have certainty. And because there's so many of you on the call from the world of local government, I'm going to assume some of you are some of those councils that have had your decision this week. You will have had colleagues who for quite some time have been saying, well, we'll be all right because when we know the government decision, then we'll know what to do. And I bet you've not woke up this morning feeling a lot more certain than you did before you got that decision, because actually what happens is you've now got a lot of other questions that you need to figure out now that you have certainty in one thing. And the reality is we just don't live in a certain world anymore. So we live in a world where there's lots of change, where there's lots of kind of going in different directions, and we have to be responsive. We have to be responsive to community need if we're in the public sector. We have to be responsive to market needs if we're in the private sector. So dealing with uncertainty is something that we just need to get better at. Now, what's interesting about uncertainty is we can look to the world of psychology to get some research in terms of what increases our tolerance to uncertainty. And it's basically these four things. So it's our mindset, our sense of psychological safety, our exposure to uncertainty, and also how we make sense of it. So I'm just going to talk you through these one by one. If you're going through a change at the moment and you're having to deal with a lot of uncertainty, this is very useful for thinking about, right, instead of waiting for the certainty, how do we actually just increase our tolerance to it? So first of all, our mindset. So we've already talked a bit about mindset. We've talked about the cats and the cheese. Now, the cats and the cheese is you do need a mixture of people. So it's not that one is better than the other. What I will say, though, is that cats people struggle a bit more with uncertainty than cheese people, because cats people, when that uncertainty happens, they look for the risk. So it's worthwhile being mindful of that and being aware of that. And really, the answer to mindset is often coaching, or it's self-coaching. It is that, just taking yourself out of the situation and looking at it on a wider spectrum. Another way of looking at mindset is, probably a lot of you have heard of the terminology of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So growth mindset is very much when it is about focusing on the opportunities, and this is uncertain, but I can do hard things, I can learn, I can grow from this, versus a fixed mindset. People sometimes default to a place of, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to do this, I'm not going to know how to do this. So remember, mindset is contextual. It is not a permanent thing, so we can choose it. So the first thing is, if we have a mindset where we are open to opportunity and we are open to learning and we're open to kind of changing how we do things, we will cope with uncertainty much better. So have a think about who is in your team and who struggles with that, and see if you can help them shift their mindset. So that's like a personal one. On a team basis, so put your hand up if you've heard the term psychological safety. Feel like it's quite buzzy at the moment. So yeah, lots of people have heard of it. So it's sometimes misunderstood. So sometimes people think of psychological safety as being, in a nice team where everybody gets along. It is not particularly that. It's actually about our ability to challenge. And it's very closely related to mindset. I think it's almost like a growth mindset on a bigger scale. So basically, teams, it's linked very highly to performance. So high performing teams tend to have high psychological safety. And what it means is that they don't have a blame culture. So when something goes wrong, we don't all point the fingers at each other. We come together and look at, right, what can we learn from this? So it's a very different mindset from, oh, it's that person's fault, to, okay, that didn't go as well as we thought. What can we change? What can we learn from it? Also, they have a more open kind of culture around experimenting, challenging, asking questions. So when you go into an organization and they have a very quiet culture and nobody's speaking up, there's probably a lack of safety there. Where you have an organization where people are coming up with ideas and it's okay to safely experiment with something and then learn from it, then you tend to have high psychological safety. And the way to achieve this is to make sure that as a manager, you are open to feedback, you are modeling a little bit of vulnerability, you are open when we don't know all the answers. So you don't want a very kind of strict hierarchical culture that stifles psychological safety. there is a really decent link between high psychological safety and high tolerance to uncertainty, which makes sense because if you put it into real and practical terms, if you've been in a role where in your team it's that people are going to get blamed, you're probably not going to put yourself out there, you're probably not going to come up with any ideas because if it goes wrong it's going to be your fault, and uncertainty means that things might go wrong and therefore people might get blamed. Whereas a high psychological safety, it would feel like, you know what, we're in this together. Let's try some things. Let's see what happens. I'm worried about this. What are you worried about? So it's a shared experience and you will be more open to that uncertainty and more able to cope with that change. So number one is a personal mindset thing. Number two is the team dynamics. Is it a psychologically safe team? So number three is your level of exposure to it. So if you, and this links back to what we were saying about the change curve, if you have been involved in a change, you have engaged with it, you've had the opportunity to shape some of that, you've been able to talk about it, all of that engagement increases your tolerance to the uncertainty. If you completely just avoid it and bury your head in the sand, actually that lowers your tolerance, because what you end up doing is building a little bit of a wall of safety around yourself where you just don't want to engage with that uncertainty. So again, very closely linked with psychological safety. If we allow people to engage in this and we talk to them and we get their views, we do co-production, we do workshops to shape things, all of that work, even if it doesn't give us the certainty, does help people to come to terms with the uncertainty. And I think this is one that particularly less experienced managers really struggle with, because sometimes you don't want to get people in a room and get them talking about something unless you can give them all of the answers. There is still power doing it. In fact, there's potentially even more power doing it when you can't give people the answers. So make sure that there is the opportunity for people to engage with this as they're going through it. Familiarity to talking about it actually reduces that sense of threat, even if you're not giving them the answers. So, for example, I did a great staff away day with a council the week before last, where it was very much guest speakers. That's why I was there. They got people to come in and talk about the change that they were going through. They had like a motivational speaker who was a sportsman, who wasn't talking about anything to do with local government, but was talking about things like resilience. And they had the leader and the chief exec do a bit of an update in terms of where we are as an organisation. But it was not about a communication of facts. It was about let's all get together and learn a bit about what it's like going through a significant change journey. Things like that are very powerful and people feel much better having done it. So then finally, sense making. So this is a really obvious one, but if we can make sense of the overall change, we can tolerate a bit of uncertainty around the detail of how we get there. And I think that particularly in the public sector, staff have a very great sense of their why, because people have chosen to go into the sector because usually they want to make a difference. And then we go through a change program, and particularly something like LGR or a restructure, it's focused very much on the things that the staff don't care about. So you've got this whole army of a workforce that care very deeply about making a difference to communities, and then we're talking to them about budget savings and restructures, which is not something that they care about. Now, there's no way around that, and you do have to sometimes save money and do restructures, but it's worth making sure that we hold that we make sense of that journey in the bigger picture. So, for example, and I'm just, because a lot of my work at the moment is in local government reorganisation, we can very easily talk a lot about, what's safe and legal, really focus on the kind of process and the mechanics of things, and forget that the point of this is to be able to offer better services to the public on a wider and broader scale. So keeping that connection to why is really, really important to help people to make sense. If we know there's a bigger picture and where we're going, we can tolerate uncertainty better. But also just using working assumptions. Like, again, sometimes we don't want to communicate with staff until we've got to a point where we have an awful lot of certainty. It's okay to say, well, our current working assumption is this, but that may change. Help people to make sense of the future and where it's going. So my third tip, and then we'll have a look at some questions. So some of you might have seen this before because I do wheel this out quite a lot. This is self-determination theory, and it comes from the world of motivation. So it's not to do with change at all. And it's basically back to what I was saying, that we have certain core needs in the workplace. And this one says that in order for us to be self-motivated and goal-directed and kind of, want to show up for work, we need these three things. And they're really obvious. So we need autonomy. We don't want to be told what to do. We want to be able to shape things in terms of how we work. We need good relationships with people. We want to get on with the people around us. We want to feel safe with those people. And we need a sense of competence. So a lot of less experienced managers don't sometimes realize this, but most people have an innate drive. They want to do a good job at work. Now, when we impose a big change on an organization, we are often negatively impacting all three of these. So by doing a top-down change, we are probably removing sense of autonomy, or we're making people's sense of autonomy feel threatened. Whether that's because you're bringing in new processes or bringing in new systems, that is going to make people feel threatened. We might be messing about with relationships, because if you're doing any sort of restructuring, then people don't know who they're going to be working with going forward, and they will feel threatened by that. And we often make people feel threatened in terms of their sense of competence, because normally when we're changing something, we're trying to improve it. And there is a sort of subtext there of it's not good enough as it is at the moment. So we need all three of these things in order to do well in the workplace. And I think this is a really, really powerful tool to just keep kind of rolling out, whether it's a business as usual situation, whether it's a small change, or whether it's a big, massive change. We need to be thinking about, as we go through this journey and we're making this change to this organization, how can we make sure that we are still meeting all three of these needs? So I've got some other little sort of general tips for you. Other topics that the world of organizational psychology covers includes things like identity. There's loads of fascinating research about that. Motivation, we've touched on. Leadership, there's loads of research out there about different types and styles of leadership. I will say I'm a bit cynical about quite a lot of it, though, because it's very sort of its time leadership studies. So at different points in history, we've had very different views on what good leadership is. So even just looking at it in that context is quite interesting. Things like well-being and stress and how we cope with it. Stress and burnout are very, very widely misunderstood. And often people focus on workload, which in some cases absolutely is workload. But in a lot of cases, things like stress and burnout come from a lack of alignment of values. So we tend to be okay working quite hard when we believe in something, but when we feel like our values are not aligned with the organizational values, that's why things like, poor relationships impact us much more than necessarily the volume of work. So there's loads of fascinating stuff around stress. Training is really interesting area, because how do people absorb information? How do people kind of take that back to the workplace? And things like engagement and, how staff morale. So there's loads and loads of stuff there. And I've got some other examples on the slide as well. And I feel very passionately that there is this kind of body of research and evidence available to us, which we're just not particularly tapping into enough at the moment. So tips for future change, if you're going through change at the moment, know your people, know who's cats and cheese, know who's struggling and who isn't, know who's likely to struggle through uncertainty and who's not. Get to know your people, get to know your colleagues. Try to think about needs and behavior, not just phases. When we have this very programmatic approach, we need that programmatic approach for the resources and the planning, but we can't have it when it comes to changing people's hearts and minds. That's not a predictable journey. And people tend to respond when they've got, kind of a need isn't being met. Experiment and get involved. So I know engagement is a bit of a cheesy thing, and I know co-production is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but in terms of actually getting people in a room together and talking about change and experimenting with it and trying different things, it's super, super powerful. And finally, skill up your leaders and your managers, because I do worry that we've got an awful lot of managers and leaders who are in a situation where they've been trained very much on how to deliver business as usual and how to make sure that, you know, things remain stable. Then we expect those people to lead change, which is a blank canvas. It's not about stability, it's about understanding behavior and needs and emotions. So try and get your middle managers to a place where they actually understand some of this stuff, because I think they're probably not always best placed to be able to deal with these kind of reactions. And then finally, just to someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail is one of my favorite sayings. And sometimes we learn a particular methodology or a particular model, and we become devoted to that. And actually, we become a little bit narrow and focused. You know, we've all met people that are like a walking Prince 2 manual, or they've got a particular toolkit that they're really, really kind of obsessed with. I think if you can pull in different models from different professions, whether it's psychology, project management, you know, comms people have got some great expertise, marketing people have got some great expertise in terms of how to influence emotions and behaviors. So there's loads of different professions out there that can bring us some really interesting stuff, HR and OD people. So try and broaden and not become too narrow when you're leading change. So I'm going to stop there. I'm hoping, Fraser, that you've had a look at some of these questions and now you can grill me, because I've been focusing on my slides rather than the chat. But yeah, hopefully that's
Yeah.
been helpful for people.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, maybe there's more kind of comments rather than some questions. So Scott worked for a legal regulator who's dealing with change from a legislation point of view. So a lot of change is done to us. Some bits are great as we'd input, but we didn't manage to win everything. In some
Yeah.
way, we don't have control over it. However, in some other aspects, we do. How can we balance this is what we can change and it's good as we wanted it versus this change is being imposed on us and we don't have a say as a full organization?
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
So I think that it's really about having clarity over what you do and don't have control over. So I always recommend to people, when you're doing any sort of co-production, the answer is to dictate the what and co-produce the how. That's not a completely fixed rule, but in some cases, people get very giddy about co-production and they try to co-produce everything, when actually you do have, and particularly in regulatory environments, there are things that do need to be dictated. And for some people, co-producing without clear boundaries is really challenging. So I think it's about having this is the things that we absolutely have to do and that we cannot change, or we have to change for whatever reason. But there will always be grey areas underneath all of those where you can change the how, you might be able to change small parts of the process. And it's focusing people on where they do have that autonomy, because it is a need. And most of my career has been in local government, which similarly, there are areas of it that are very highly regulated. So children's services, for example, housing is now quite highly regulated. However, there is still opportunity for, even if it's just, do we change that form? Even if it's just, do we tweak that IT system? Focus the autonomy on where it's genuine. Because if we pretend to co-produce when we're not actually co-producing, then that damages trust, which damages your psychological safety. So yeah, find the opportunity for autonomy, I would say.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, thanks, Scott. So Sapna has asked, what is the silver bullet? The million-dollar question, Lucy. What is the silver bullet to assess the success of change?
So to assess the success of change, the answer to that will be different for different change programs, because some change programs, it will be about, you know, kind of whether you saved the money or not, whether you improved the process or not. So it will be different for different change programs. I don't think that there is a silver bullet. I mean, my observation as somebody that's done it for 20 years is that most people, the change doesn't land because they haven't engaged with staff enough. And or they think they've engaged with staff enough, but it's been a very kind of one-way engagement. The change that I've seen that has gone well is where there've been a lot of engagement with staff. They felt that sense of autonomy. They've been able to shape it. But yeah, I don't think there is a particular silver bullet, because genuinely a lot of my work is around culture. And one of the things I love about my job is every organization I go to, the culture is different. So and designing the right change intervention relies on you knowing that culture. Some organizations have a very fast-paced culture, in which case that success would be how quickly it had gone through. Some organizations have a very people-driven focus, in which case the success would be around, are the people fully engaged? If you tried to impose the same change in 3 different organizations with 3 different cultures, probably the measure of success and the type of resistance you would get would be different, which comes back to why I think you've just got to have a broad toolkit, because if you're moving around and doing change in different places, then you will find that different things work in different places.
Yeah, thanks. Joanne has asked a question. Joanne, how do we apply these insights in actual change and transformation work?
So do you mean in terms of like a PMO function or as leaders? Because I've kind of led this session more from the point of view of people that are leading staff. I am very passionate about the fact that I think our PMO systems and structures are often not really kind of set up to think about this kind of stuff. So if you're asking me that question as the leader of an organization that was, bringing in a PMO system, I would be saying you need to train up anybody that's involved in change and transformation needs to have a good grasp of some of these tools. People that are leading others, it'll be more about the cats and cheese type mindset stuff, because they're the ones that are influencing individual people's kind of approach to change. When it's a systematic organizational approach to change, my starting point would be a culture review, because you can't deliver change in an organization if you don't understand what its culture is. And then from there, it would be, do your people that are involved in the change have an understanding of how people change, or do they just have an understanding of project and program management?
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Joanne. Gabby has asked a question and mentions, Lucy, all this affects neurodivergent people or people with past trauma even more due
Yeah.
to how their nervous systems work. I think maybe Gabby, you mean how do we advocate for the right level of support, I guess, for those people,
Yeah,
individuals?
so I'm not a specialist in neurodivergency. My next kind of research thing I want to do is I want to do a master's in neuroscience, which is more about the kind of mechanics of your brain, because I mean, as I said at the start, big animal lover. I do think we're all animals, and I think that we can sort of overcomplicate some of the stuff, and we do have things going on in our brain, whether it's dopamine, serotonin. I think we're a little bit disconnected to how our brains actually function. So I may learn more about neurodivergency on that journey. But I think I imagine, just from my own experience and people in my own family that are neurodiverse, I think those core needs are the same. They're just potentially more pronounced. So I think it's about really understanding yourself in order to be able to advocate for yourself well. But people still do need to have a sense of autonomy and be able to shape their environment. So whether that's different environmental needs, different sensory needs, people still need to have support. We're all on a spectrum in that some of us are very extroverted and really want to kind of have really positive relationships. Some of us are a bit more introverted, so that people are all on spectrums for things like that. But I think that those needs are still really core, and it's about probably that kind of self-awareness of exactly what you need in the organization. But yeah, I'm not a specialist in neurodivergency, so I wouldn't be able to comment on specifics in that. But I think we're all people, and we all have those needs and need to be able to fit into our workplace.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy.
Any more questions?
So Joanne's also asked, thanks, Lucy, she said, thank you, Lucy. Do you publish case studies of the work you've done? It would be helpful to understand how these insights are applied in the real world. The answer is yes, but Lucy, yeah, we do, don't we, on our website?
We do, yeah. So yeah, we can post a link to that, which Yeah, we absolutely. And we've got an area of our website that is all about case studies. So that's specific work that we've done. But then we also have a page on the website called Insights, which is where we put recordings of these so you can watch other ones. But also I do quite a lot of recordings of just like kind of pick a topic about psychology and talk about it. So anyone's welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I do share stuff quite regularly. But yeah, I mean, the most powerful thing if an organization is going through change, even though I haven't talked a lot about culture, the most powerful thing is to make sure that you understand your culture so that then you're not hitting the change in a way that's so alien to your organizational culture that people are just going to completely disengage from it.
Yeah. Scott, thanks for asking. Scott, you've just mentioned how can we get in touch to deliver this webinar internally? I'd love to get in touch. Scott, thank you for asking. And yes, a lot of our work comes from the back of the change chats. I've just dropped my email address into the chat, which is there. So please do reach out to me. I've got your details as well to follow up. We can continue this conversation offline. That would be great. Thank you, Scott. Catherine, Lucy, do you keep track of how people respond to a period of change, such as tracking well-being?
So we do sometimes do pulse surveys, but I have spoken to a couple of people in the sector that have got, kind of pre-existing software to do that in a more consistent way. My only sort of difficulty is because a lot of my clients are local authorities. Bringing in a new software is quite challenging. But yeah, we do things like pulse surveys, and when we do a culture review, we will often do the bulk of the work with a culture review is workshop based, but we'll often do a few months later a kind of pulse survey just to get a sense of whether or not things have moved. But yeah, I'm always open to talking about well-being. And again, well-being is not a specialism of mine. My specialism is more about how organizations work, but there's definitely a really big Venn diagram with the two for sure.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you. You've also inquired really interesting future session on tools around delivering culture change, and particularly how to understand cultures when different organisations are being brought together. Yeah, very topical, Sarah, especially those in LGR. Lucy doing a lot of culture review work for several councils just now. So I'd
Yeah.
be delighted to speak to you about that. My email is there, but I'll drop you a line after this and we can arrange a chat. So thank you for that inquiry.
We have done previous change chats.
Yeah,
So actually our next change chat is in September, which is about designing the culture you actually need. So that's on the 11th of September. And then the one after that is specific to local government reorganisation. But yeah, we can definitely have a chat. And please do. I forgot to say this, but we are going to do a bit of a kind of forward plan program of change chats in August when it's a little bit quieter. So if everybody could just put in the chat if there are any specific topics that you're interested in for future change chats, then please do just stick them in the chat, because I would we try and put like 6 months worth on at a time, and at the moment we've only got up to October. So
yeah.
yeah, we'd love to hear those ideas.
And we would, yes, indeed. Thank
Different
you, Lucy.
different organizations being brought together is a really fascinating area, and I've done quite a lot of culture work in that, because you bring in together sort of legacy systems and legacy ways of working. So we recently did a culture review for a council that had been through local government reorganisation, which for the non-local government people means basically disbanding of local councils and then setting up a new, bigger council. So it is a new entity, but you are bringing staff together from different organisations, and doing a review after that was really fascinating in terms of where culture had become aligned, but where it was still kind of in that legacy them and us space. So yeah, that's definitely something we can talk about.
Brilliant. I have pasted the link to the next and upcoming change chat for culture. So it is there. Please do click on that, everybody, and register for that for September. And as Lucy said, if you've got any ideas and you'd like to share with us for the next topics, please do share that. Lucy, thank you very much. I know that I work with you every day and always learn stuff from these presentations and change chat. So thank you, and I hope everybody else found it very useful as well. As I mentioned, if anybody wants to continue the conversation, offline with myself or with Lucy, please do reach out. And again, my email is on the chat there. Would love to have a conversation to hear more about what your maybe challenges and kind of issues are just now, and we can talk about the value we're bringing in more detail to many, many councils and local authorities round and about, or others for that matter in public sector. So please do get in touch. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Lucy, thank you for that. Appreciate it. And I hope everybody's got some useful takeaways.
Brilliant. And just, best of luck to everybody that got their decision this week. I know you'll be very much now in that chaotic space of there's suddenly loads and loads of work to do. So yeah, do reach out if we can help with anything.
Yes, I'll give you a week or two to digest and come to terms with these decisions, and I'll be reaching out to see how we can help. Thanks, everybody.